everybody. Thanks everyone for joining us. Let Hans in. Hey, Hans. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Kate. Hello, everybody. Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this very special edition of Minnesota Prison Writing Workshops Before Time reading series to celebrate the book launch of The Sentences. Oh man, I have my background to blurry and so damn it. Just look at the back of Kate's wall and you'll see a copy of The Sentences That Create Us from Pen America and Haymarket Books. My name is Sue Huang. I'm a poet, MPWW instructor, and coordinator for the Before Time reading series. Coming to you from occupied Dakota, Ojibwe, and Anishinaabe land that we now call Minnesota. It's a real honor to welcome all of you here tonight with guests from both sides of the country, sunny California. How's the weather in New York, Caits? Okay.
Pouring rain.
Okay, well, that sounds good because it's snowing pretty hard here in Minnesota today. But thank you again for being here. Wow, I think we already have like how many people in the Zoom room? Almost 70 people, and people are still filing in. So this is a great turnout and just super honored to have everyone join us. Just a quick reminder that this reading is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel. So if you're feeling shy, please feel free to turn off your cameras And please remember to stay muted during the program. But we hope you'll stay to the end to send along cheers and words of encouragement to support those watching on the inside. And to everyone watching this at a later date, we're sending you all the good vibes through the ether, through time and space and bars. Before Time was inspired by MPWW's bi-monthly reading series with the Stillwater Prison Writers Collective. Since the in-person reading series is on hold indefinitely during the pandemic, these monthly recorded events serve as a small offering to our students who we haven't seen since early March 2020. Before Time brings together local and national writers, as well as MPWW instructors, mentors, and alums. And we're so grateful to all our guests who've made Before Time such a vibrant virtual reading series. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Jennifer Bowen, founder and artistic director of MPWW, who also happened to celebrate her birthday yesterday from the road. So happy birthday, Jen. To introduce tonight's amazing host, Caits Meissner from PEN America. Jen. Jen, you're on mute.
Yes, because I get the wrong every time. 100% of the time I get them wrong. I said, thank you so much. And please stop reminding everyone that I'm aging, Sue, but I do love you. Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. It's fun to be in pixelated community if we can't be together in person. And this occasion especially feels super exciting to me, especially because I love Caits. And it is my huge, incredible honor to introduce her, Miss Caits Meissner. I've been pleasantly startled by Caits since the very first day she began her work with PEN America. And what was evident the week she came to visit the writers in our program, as well as the very first moment I met her, and through every interaction we've had since, is that this teacher, poet, artist, comic, witness, activist is a force for good. Before I read her formal bio, I want to recognize Caits for this truly groundbreaking publication. 10 years ago, the PEN Handbook for Prison Writers was a tiny booklet bound by staples. My students cherished that little handbook for the lean craft guidance it offered. I'd pass one out to a writer in his first class and spot it worn and battered in that same man's blue folder maybe 4 years later. And that's because any tool that invites expression is a lifeline for people in prison. But the sentences that create us, this vast, comprehensive, new, inviting book, is not just any tool. It's filled with exercises, inspiration, examples. It's exactly what the incarcerated writers need. And do you know why? It's because Caits knows the prison system, and she knows the brilliant writers who helped create this book. She has visited with them in person, by phone, by JPay, and through letters. She knows these contributors as well as they know her, and thanks to her work with PEN, as well as they know each other. Caits intended this book to be a community, and it is one. It's one that will remain in a writer's cell regardless of what formal programs come and go, where those even existed to begin with. Because Caits is at the helm, this book is not just a book, and it's not just a community, it's a sea change. The sentences that create us invites folks locked away from society to tell their stories, and it gives them the tools and the community to do so. It's an invitation to alter not just our literature, but our lives. And if you're watching this from inside a facility right now, that last bit is up to you. For us to read your story, you must write it. Caits Meissner, mover of systems and norms and hearts, made a miracle happen so you may do so. And inside that miracle is her dedication. It says, for you who holds this book, to you who holds the pen. She means you, yes, you. Caits, our host tonight, is the force that made it happen. Please welcome Caits Meissner, who is the Director of Prison and Justice Writing at PEN America. Caits has taught, consulted, and co-created extensively for over 15 years across a wide spectrum of communities, with a focus on prisons, public schools, and college classrooms at the New School and the City of New York. In 2017, Meissner re-envisioned the concept of a book tour for her illustrated poetry collection, Let It Die Hungry, pairing public speaking engagements with opportunities to work with incarcerated writers across the United States. Thank you for your work, Caits. Thanks for being with us tonight, and welcome.
I feel woozy and disoriented by that. I had to close my eyes and breathe really heavily so I wouldn't cry. That recognition from you, Jen, is such a gift. Your birthday, my gift. Sorry, I had to bring it up too. It's incredibly special to be here. It's wonderful to see everyone. And before we dive into this book, which I'm going to give you a little context of through reading some excerpts of each contributor's pieces to introduce them, and apologies to contributors whose fantastic bios have gotten cut to a single line, so I can share the words in this book and give folks on here and inside a taste of what's between the pages. But it's really important that I start with a love letter back to Jen and MPWW, because the writing that comes out of MPWW's classes is absolutely astonishing. The amount of cultural change you've made in the space of writers who are incarcerated and their work being taken seriously is, I think, among the most incredible work I've ever seen done in this realm. Your organization teaches me. It's no surprise that this book is full of MPWW contributors, including you, Jen, who offered a writing exercise. That's fantastic. And of course, quotes work from folks in your classrooms. There's so many writers in MPWW that should have been in this book, but I couldn't fit them all. That's really how I feel. And I want you to know, for the writers that aren't in this book, but that I know at MPWW, that you are in this book because you taught me. And I got to visit 5 MPWW facilities, and make no mistake, it deeply inspired this collection, down to the fact that Zeke Caligiuri, who we'll hear from later, told me the story of founding the Stillwater Writers Collective that became the model for all of MPWW's collectives. And Zeke was really clear that, listen, I want to tell you the story of how we did this before anybody did it for us. And it moved me. And the very first idea I had for this book in terms of contributors was that essay. So MPWW, this book wouldn't be what it is without you, quite literally. Okay, so tonight we have all contributors to this book. It is like a reunion tour. We have Ellen Bass, Zeke Caligiuri, Glitter Squirrel, Randall Horton, Nicole Shawan Jr., Nigel Poor, artist and, host of the creator of the award-winning podcast Ear Hustle, Louise J. Rodriguez, Louise K. Waakaa'igan, and Jeffrey Young. These are all cultural icons, okay, whether you know them or not yet. So get ready for a great reading. To kick off the evening, I am incredibly excited to introduce you to somebody I've not met in person, but emailed with for many years. When I was doing my book tour in prisons, this person helped support that and set it up, and since has been a major supporter. And of course, like Sue revealed earlier behind the scenes, I am a massive fangirl. In fact, I think people on Twitter call it the Ellen Bass Hive, okay? Ellen will be reading a few poems of her own tonight, but I'm gonna give you a little context of what Ellen has in the book. Now, if any of the contributors are planning to read what was in the book, just give me a little signal so I will just rearrange my intro. So Ellen contributed an essay called Writing the Poem of the Moment. It's a writing exercise that really, through narrative, takes readers through writing the poem of the moment. I'm not going to give you the exercise. You got to buy the book for it. But I'm going to read a little bit of the narrative. And so much of editing this book was about how do we tell the story of writing through narrative? How do we show through the way the piece unfolds? So I think Ellen does this wonderfully. And this is the paragraph I chose to read, Ellen. This is Ellen talking about entering a men's prison for the first workshop. Usually in a workshop, Ellen writes, I'll read the poem I've selected and talk a little bit about it, pointing out various aspects of the craft. But in our first session, the men at Salinas Valley State Prison were so eager that they started commenting on the poem before I could start. Folks inside understand this. They're all going, mm-hmm. I was delighted by their enthusiasm and impressed by their insight into the elements of the poem. 2 of the men had such strong opinions about their interpretations of a line in the poem that I had to intervene and establish that there is often more than one way to construe a poem. But I was thrilled to see this kind of excitement about syntax. In just a short time, real trust was built. Poetry gave us what poetry always offers. In the words of Galway Canal, to me, poetry is somebody standing up, so to speak, and saying with as little concealment as possible what it is for him or her to be on the earth at this moment. Ellen Bass is the author and editor of 9 books. Her most recent poetry collection is Indigo from Copper Canyon Press in 2020. I've read it and loved it and earmarked it. She founded workshops, poetry workshops in California prisons and jails, and teaches at Pacific University. You're in for a treat.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Thank you everyone for all the work that you do to make this possible. And thank you everybody for being here. This is really just a delight to be here with you all. I was invited to start teaching at Salinas Valley State Prison about 10 years ago. And by the psychologist who was there, who is also a poet himself. And we started a poetry workshop that has continued now with some of my students and some other poets in the Santa Cruz community teaching there. I wasn't, when I entered for the first time, when I thought about entering for the first time, I wasn't worried about teaching the workshop or how we would relate, because I did have a lot of experience teaching at that point, and I had worked for many years with people in all different circumstances, especially survivors of childhood trauma and abuse, and I felt confident about our relationships. But what I didn't feel confident about was what poem I should start out with. And I spent weeks and weeks and weeks trying to figure out what poem would be the right poem, because I felt like that was really going to be our introduction. And I wanted to just start by sharing with you the poem that these men fought over and that I decided to begin with. And it wound up being a very good choice. It's by the poet Joseph Millar, and it's called Soul Custody. Today he'll ride his bike to Safeway in his death's head earring and mismatched socks, where the checkers all know his name. He'll buy Cheetos and Kool-Aid before coming home to bathe in the rusty light from the TV, until I get off work and collapse on the fake velvet sofa, a double order of fast food bleeding grease through a bag in my fist. He hasn't eaten anything green in a week, and I see the dirt under his fingernail when he points to the surfboard he drew on his sneaker. What would we do if I got fired, I wonder, listening to the wind outside and the evening's lead story announcing more layoffs in the South Bay. There's enough in the bank for his school clothes, and the rent's almost paid again. I should be happier. He's been watching the talk shows. Have you ever done it with someone you didn't love? He asks, his old guitar resting against the wall like an abandoned girlfriend, and the pleats of the houndstooth flea market slacks gathered around his small waist like the leaves of a sunflower calyx. Eat slowly, I say, as he smiles at me around a mouthful of fries, points the clicker at my chest and says, I'm getting fat. We're bound together like sailors, swaying across a dark ocean, resigned to each other's odd humors and unable to see the stars overhead as we stagger around in the engine room of a ship with a foreign name. I don't know how many of you who are listening today are very familiar with what goes on inside poetry workshops and writing workshops with incarcerated people. But the thing that surprised me, I expected that everyone would be very interested in sharing their own stories and in what they had to say. What surprised me is that the men that I worked with were equally, if not more, interested in reading poems and in discussing poems. And I knew there would be a deep emotional need to connect, but I didn't realize the hunger for intellectual stimulation, to talk about things that mattered and have real discussions. And that was just thrilling. That was what really surprised me, was that deep need to be able to talk about important things that were meaningful, and to listen to each other. I want to share this poem that I wrote about an experience teaching there. It was spring, it was early summer, and in Santa Cruz, California, where I live, it seemed that year there were more flowers than I had ever seen before. And I had this completely illogical feeling that I just wanted to take the men in my workshop out for a field trip. And we would come back after, but that they just could see these flowers. And I just was chewing on that and chewing on it. And finally I thought, I'm going to try and take flowers in. And at Salinas Valley anyway, what you could take in depended on who happened to be a guard that day and how they were feeling. It was not consistent. So I thought I might get there and maybe we couldn't take them in, but maybe I could, and we'd see what happened. So I'm going to read this poem, and then I'll talk a little bit more about it. It's called Bringing Flowers to Salinas Valley State Prison. When Mr. H saw the little meadow blooming on the steel table, he bowed to the starry faces of jasmine. This is the first flower I've smelled in 20 years. And when I slid each man a bouquet in a paper cup, Mr. M said, I'll have such a short time with these. We spoke then about beauty and loss, the great themes of poetry. And when our time was done and the guards said they had to leave the flowers, most of the men acquiesced. But Mr. S insisted he had, as a Native American, a right to his rituals, sage, sweet corn, tobacco, and no one could stop him. It was the law, from taking these sacred plants back to his cell. Then he raised his cup and drank the water the flowers were drinking, and a small wind stirred in that windowless room as we watched Mr. S quietly bite the heads off the Peruvian lilies, crushing their pink sepals and the gold inner petals flecked with maroon, swallowing the silvery filaments, their dark, pollen-laden anthers, his mouth frothing with blossoms. After I wrote this poem, I showed it to Mr. S to see how he felt about it, because I wanted to make sure that he approved that I had written it. And he read the poem, and he looked up at me, and he said, I did that. And it was one of those moments when you realize the importance of literature, the importance of art, that it shows us ourselves. He had done it, but he didn't take in the powerful, creative, talk about creative. He had found this way to take those flowers back to his cell, and no one was going to stop him. And he hadn't quite realized what he had done until we had that exchange. And that we say that, and it's true, that the poem begins with the poet, but it ends with the reader. It begins with the writer, but ends with the reader. And I felt that this poem was finished when Mr. S read the poem. I thought I'd read just a couple more poems. This poem is just an example of extraordinary and unusual kindness, and I thought it would be good for all of us to hear. It's called Kiss. When Lynn saw the lizard floating in her mother-in-law's swimming pool, she jumped in. And when it wasn't breathing, its body limp as a baby drunk on milk, she laid it on her palm and pressed one fingertip to its silky breast, with just about the force you need to test the ripeness of a peach, only quicker, a brisk little push with a bit of spring in it. Then she knelt, dripping wet, in her Doc Martens and camo t-shirt with the neck ripped out, and bent her face to the lizard's face, her big plush lips to the small stiff jaw that she'd pried apart with her opposable thumb, and she blew a tiny puff into the lizard's lungs. The sun glared against the turquoise water. What did it matter if she saved one lizard more or less in the world? But she bestowed the kiss of life again and again until the lizard's wrinkled lids peeled back, its muscles roused its own first breath, and she set it on the hot cement where it rested a moment before darting off. That's a true story. And I will end with this poem, If You Knew. What if you knew you'd be the last to touch someone? If you were taking tickets, for example, at the theater, tearing them, giving back the ragged stubs, you might take care to touch that palm, brush your fingertips along the lifeline's crease. When a man pulls his wheeled suitcase too slowly through the airport, when the car in front of me doesn't signal, when the clerk at the pharmacy won't say thank you, I don't remember they're going to die. A friend told me she'd been with her aunt. They'd just had lunch, and the waiter, a young gay man with plum black eyes, joked as he served the coffee, kissed her aunt's powdered cheek when they left. Then they walked half a block, and her aunt dropped dead on the sidewalk. How close does the dragon's spume have to come? How wide does the crack in heaven have to split? What would people look like if we could see them as they are? Soaked in honey, stung and swollen, reckless, pinned against time. Thank you.
It's such a dance when you have these events with so many people on them, because I feel like we need to like sit in those poems. And I think everyone who reads is going to feel that way, but I hope you've joined the Ellen Bass Hive. You see what I'm saying. That poem about bringing flowers to prison broke me open. And I saw Nigel wrote in the chat, the workaround. There's all kinds of names for it, but when people ask me, why do I do prison work? I have a lot of political reasons I could state. But it really comes down to, I think, if I'm being honest, that I'm an artist, and there's nowhere I've seen such imagination. Thank you for bringing that forward, Ellen, and for that gorgeous work, and for sharing that poem that's in your essay. That was so special for me. One of the things that I love about MPWW in this space, and I'm sad I never got to experience it in person, is that the writing community is built through the walls. We are presencing incarcerated writers next to award-winning writers like it's nothing, because it is nothing. So tonight, of course, we're gonna do that. And thanks to MPWW's collaboration with We Are All Criminals and the Scene Project, we've been gifted the ability to see and hear work from 3 incredible MPWW writers and contributors to this book, of course. Special shout out to Emily Baxter for that powerful work. I'm going to introduce you to Zeke again, who I brought up a little bit earlier. Zeke will be, I'll tell you what he's doing in a minute. Actually, I'm going to read from his essay, and then I'll give you a little insight into what he'll be reading. So, wow, some gems are being dropped in the chat, by the way. Pay attention. Imagination, a forced bloom of suffering, I think, says Linda Lee. Poem. So Zeke's essay is about building writing community, and through it, he details kind of the process of how him and C. Fausto Cabrera brought together their forces to create this writing group. And then MPW came in and really provided it with a container and more resources. I'm gonna read 2 short clips that kind of come at the tail end of that story. I love this. Zeke says, we grew to understand the scarcity of resources. In community, there can be a pooling of these resources. We build collectives so that the mechanics of the writer's life won't get in the way of the writing, even though it still will. It's not therapy and it's not magic either. It's work, but it's our work. We find fellowship with others who care about their work, or at least with others who believe that life is bigger than the labor these places expect from us or the scraps they throw at us. There has to be space to communicate that on the page. Then Zeke moves on to offer tips about how to develop a writing group. One of them, for example, is you are building allies, not a gang. Writing groups are also reading groups, on and on and on. But one of my favorite lines in his essay, because it cracks me up and it's so true, is, here's the other important note about prison writing communities. They aren't collective hallelujahs. I love it. So Zeke, and so true. Typically, they are competitive and cliquey and composed of people fragmented and fractured by the experience of incarceration. Put simply, plenty of our cohort almost can't stand each other, but together we clarify and contextualize each other. We offer peer support, and greater than that, we are an alliance. Zeke is a writer who has taught me a lot, just the way he engages. He is the consummate professional. He is not all that impressed or interested by an opportunity because he's had plenty. He's been a successful writer from prison. He has set the tone and the stage for other writers in prison to follow in his footsteps. He's a force. Zeke Caligiuri is the author of This Is Where I Am, a memoir that was published on the University of Minnesota Press in 2016, which was a finalist for the 2017 Minnesota Book Award. He has won 4 PEN Prison Writing Awards. Tip of the iceberg bio, as they all are. And we are going to be watching now Zeke reading his poem, Before I Was Anything. That's what we're going to watch.
Zeke from Before I Was Anything. Before I was anything, I was an abstraction, sound waves moving through glycerin. Before the effigies of my generation in orange jumpsuits started tattooing cuffs on their wrists, scars on their hearts, I was a red jumpsuit running under evergreens on the edge of a mountain. Back then, I was a story they would tell me my whole life. Before I was anything, I was an open school education, cracks big enough to climb down into, strange fleeting minutes alone, subterranean stairwells where feelings, as vacuums consume the moving photographs of moments compressed between years, bound to one another, the ones they said would come eventually and go away so quickly. That was before. City Center was Mecca and kids made Hajj, stealing jabots from Dayton's and looked at all the people they knew on the wall in the holding tank in the basement. I was a poem, carved in the glass on the back seat of the 5 bus. That was before. I became time. Stories, smoke accumulated in the walls. I was still standing on that rooftop, watching tricks circle the block. I was still on the bus, behind a janitor's uniform and the smell of fryer grease. I was already on fire. Before I was anything, I was already something my parents could never explain, dressed up in imagined colors. I became a blue shirt, guileless ghost hovering through these hallways. I am still sound waves, moving through glycerin, atoms collapsing, but it's okay. Baby New Year on the cusp of a baby new horizon, it's okay. I'm still the abstraction that will maybe write that poem or change the last one, tell the story, or write my way back to life. Yep.
A piece of writing advice I got when I was young that stuck with me forever, and I still think is some of the best writing advice there is for poems, is make sure every single line matters. Cut the fluff. Each line should hit on its own, and talk about a writer who does that. I wanted to pick out an image and I was like, well, everyone is worth mentioning, but I will say, etched in the glass in the back of the bus. Zeke, thank you. Glad you're here with us. Glad you're in this book. Book wouldn't be the same without your contribution. I love that I get to introduce all my friends and my friends in the work, my friends in the writing. The next writer that's incarcerated that we'll hear from, also a contributor to the book, is Glitter Squirrel, who has a very short missive in the introduction to one of the sections of the book that's embedded. And I honestly could not imagine this book without Glitter Squirrel's voice. And so I found a way to get her voice in. And what I did was pick a small piece of writing that she wrote on commission for the World Voices Festival, an international festival of literature that PEN America puts on every year, about the experience of writing in prison. And I think she captures so many people's words with this. She writes, every time a prisoner submits their writing into the public sphere, they are subjecting themselves to an audience who can easily look them up and be told a prosecutor's version of a story, true or untrue, about their conviction. This is in juxtaposition to all a prisoner desires, to put the past behind them, to lay low and quietly merge back into society, to reconnect with those they love in fresh circumstances. Writing as a prisoner ties their name to the label of felon. A prisoner must ask themselves, am I willing to put myself out there, to possibly be talked about again, to be judged again? And more importantly, is this story, play, poem idea worth my vulnerability? Will people listen or judge? While all artists and writers question the value of their work and wonder who is viewing it and how it will be perceived, a prisoner who is an artist or who writes always carries the added burden of having to apologize for their past, or for a piece of their past, or one afternoon of their past, or for 1 minute of their past. Glitter Squirrel writes with such a sharpness, but also you have not even seen her poems. They can be lush and rangy. She hand makes me the cutest holiday cards I've ever seen. This year's, it was a figure of a person wrapped in bubble wrap. Glitter Squirrel is famous among other writers who win our Prison Writing Awards anthology because they always write to us about her work in particular. She is the recipient of 6 National PEN Prison Writing Awards, as well as 2 Minnesota broadsides. Her work has been published in Stillwater Journal, the PEN 10 Interview Series, the Asian American Writers Workshops, A World Without Cages, and American Theater Magazine. I think that a lot more has come since this bio was written, as far as I know, but I'll let time reveal it. Before Glitter Squirrel's poem, MPWW instructor and the Writers Collective sponsor at Shakopee Prison, Heidi Czerwiec, will read a special message from Glitter Squirrel.
Hi, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here tonight and to get to present Glitter Squirrel's words to you. She's a delightful student and friend, and Glitter Squirrel, I miss you so much. So here is the message that she wanted to share with y'all. Hello, everyone. So much of an incarcerated writer's stress involves limited space to store books and paperwork. This handbook is thoughtfully compact and accessible, full of information and beautiful work by people we love, including my favorite, Louise J. Rodriguez. Sentences also has a special secret ingredient, Caits Meissner. Caits curates the writings in an easily digestible and helpfully delicious format that allows the reader the ability to skip around with ease. I am proud to be able to contribute to this anthology. It is always a pleasure to work with Caits and the lovely people at PEN America, and Jen and her band of ever steadfast and brilliant teachers and mentors at MPWW. Cheers and congratulations on this spectacular book.
I need to know what is behind the red swastika, on the back of her neck, on permanent display that hates. The Catholic, Jew, atheist, political dissident, gay, mentally ill, physically challenged in me. I shut my door, but unable to shun. Compassion tested, we make conversation, because I need to know who is behind the swastika, and I see her brown eyes. Will we speak of youth in poor company, chemically induced decisions and weaknesses, or straight up fascism? She usually walks alone in the courtyard. I don't want to love her, and I don't, but I learned that I don't hate her like I do her tattoo of the red swastika on the back of her neck that hates me.
Glitter Squirrel. The other reason that I've stuck with this work for so many years now is because the writers like Glitter Squirrel that I've met in prison teach me so much about being human. And is there a better poem to illustrate that? Thank you, Glitter Squirrel. There is a lot of I miss yous in the chat. One of those I miss yous, of course, is from Louise. And this leads me into our next reader, because something that's really special about this book that emerged, I mean, of course, these are all people that I knew and sought out as an editor to write about specific topics, but also what I couldn't have predicted is just how many times names talk to each other in the text. So my friend, who I'm going to tell you about, Randall Horton, is, for example, his memoir is mentioned in the nonfiction memoir chapter as an example of an exquisite book. And Louise J. Rodriguez, who is here tonight and who Glitter Squirrel just said is her favorite, okay, get this, references in his poetry chapter Louise K. Waakaa'igan's poem, okay? Louise Waakaa'igan, in her essay, wrote about her mentor, Randall Horton, who worked with MPWW to do a chapbook contest, which Reginald Dwayne Betts, who did the foreword of this book, chose. And through Randall, it was published. So this is just a great moment to illuminate this nature of the fact that there's this unseen community that has been bubbling for years and active for years. And I think there's something really cool about getting to see all of these inner webs that just naturally emerged. And to me, in my intro, I say, and I believe it, that is community in action. Community, literary community means very little to me. There's a lot of literary scene. This is literary community. So I really want to curse, because I won't, but I really want to be like, this MRF for Randall Horton, and I have done some stuff together, okay? I was like, Randall, you're gonna be my friend whether you like it or not. I blurbed his amazing poetry book. I hosted his book release. Okay, I was the moderator there too. All right, Randall and I are gonna be in conversation at the Dallas Book Festival in March. If you happen to be there, check us out. Moderated by Deb Olin Unferth. Randall just got a Creative Capital grant for an amazing project with music in prisons that I believe he's working with MPWW on. I mean, I can't keep up with this man. Okay, his bio is like a year long, but I'll give you the short one. Randall Horton is the author of Hook, a memoir, and 4 books of poetry. His latest memoir, Deadweight, was recently released. That's what we'll be talking about on the 19th. At the University of New Haven, Dr. Horton is currently the only tenured full professor in the United States with 7 felony convictions, okay? He's been in this game long before anybody else. He sits on the advisory board of PEN America's Writing for Justice Fellowship. He's been a judge, he's been a friend, he's shown up in every possible way, he teaches me, and we've gotten batted out a few times. And I consider that this man sharpens me. I can't wait for you to hear him read. And his essay in the book is the epilogue. It's the transition of next steps. It is a really important essay because it shows the readers of this book, which mostly is talking about while in prison, the next step. And with that, Randall.
Thank you, Caits. I don't deserve those good words from you, my good friend, but I'm gonna take them. I'm gonna take them. And so thank you for everything, for the book. I thought I had left the book in school because I've been teaching out of it, actually, man. I've been teaching my prison lit class, my intro class. It's a lot of jewels in here that just like reach outside of the confines of what we call the inside. And so I consider that, definitely great, man. So congratulations to you for the work that you put in. So we appreciate you about that. I'm gonna read the epilogue. It's short, and so I had a choice to read something from the new book, but I have a chance for that. I appreciate the opportunity to share these words because some of the people in here actually, meant a lot to me on this journey, right? So, oh, and big ups to Louis Rodriguez. I see you there, sir. I appreciate you too. Much love. We'll talk later. Epilogue. A writing life and community from inside out. The flashpoint event that forced a different kind of community upon me, one not involved in riding twin-engine Cessnas or slicing through the Caribbean in cigarette boats toward Hatcher Bay, occurred in a program at Montgomery County Detention Center in Rockville, Maryland. Each night before we met, I was sitting cell 17, putting pen to legal pad, working out questions posed by Pat Parker, the social worker in charge of the group. The questions demanded I excavate traumatic events from my past in terms of the harm I had caused others and myself. Regurgitating memory to the page and then to listening ears told me one thing. I had the ability to connect with people and myself through the written word. Before going upstate, Pat Parker made me promise I would never stop writing. No one had ever demanded a promise like that from me. I do not know what Pat saw in me, but I held on to that promise while riding the Bluebird upstate. Sebastian, Big Pun, Milkman, and Hell No. Cats doing way more time than I can ever imagine became my second writing community. The strict critiquers of my novel in progress. The protagonist was a 13-year-old girl and a poet. The novel failed miserably, but from that failure emerged a love for poetry and one nonfiction chapter that would find its way into my fourth book, Hook, the memoir, years later. No matter how many nights I sat up late inside cell 23 as 289128 property of the state, later, 289128 became the title of my first book. The idea of writing a writing life seemed more mythological than the American dream. And looking back, when Milkman and Black would roll the ice cart around C-tier after 10 p.m. lock-in, stop by my cell and talk about my writing, those were my first workshops. No part of my story went uncritiqued in the 5 minutes we had to talk before lights out. In those conversations, fiction was the closest to reality as we would ever get. We were trying to think outside of the box we had found ourselves in. After being abruptly shipped back to Montgomery County for my sentence modification hearing, I was placed in the same unit where I first began to write. All the faces had changed, of course, but I found comfort sharing with those who had been through the same battles I had. I knew I wanted to be a poet after watching Patricia Smith perform the poem Skinhead on a VHS tape brought in by one of the social workers. Smith, a black woman, began her poem embodying a white Nazi with the line, "They call me Skinhead, and I got my own beauty." I was fascinated that one could be both a poet and command a physical presence that sought to change the world. I wanted to change. And I understood change to be a never-ending process. But now I began to ask a new question. Could I have a writing life too? A modification of that sentence allowed me to enter a 2-year residential program in Durham, North Carolina. Every night in the gymnasium converted to a 30-day intake center for the program, I would recite poems trying to figure out how Patricia not only captured emotion, but also how and why it meant something in the larger world. A year in, I was offered certain liberties, and one was being escorted to an open mic in Hillsborough, North Carolina. I read my first poem at a venue called Vague Metaphors. The poets that stepped to the mic were embracing in a way street life never was. I felt welcome rather than self-conscious. I was sent back to Washington, D.C. with a new sense of who I was, a self that I began to recognize as the true representation of who I am. When I returned to D.C. in between trying to find a job, I found my way to slam vignetism. In 2002, I read my first poem, totally free from the state, in a room full of people who had no idea I had been to prison. Each time I showed up, I stayed to myself, sat in the back, read a poem, and listened to others read their work. One night, a poet named Alan King came up to me to talk about poems I had been reading. That one exchange led to being introduced to a nexus of writers who, by mere association, pointed me to the path I did not yet know I was on. All of the poets came to find that I had been in prison, and yet no one judged me for the past that had caused so much wreckage, choosing instead to focus on the foundation I could build upon. There was Truth Thomas, who will receive the NAACP Image Award in Poetry in 2013 for his collection Speak Water. Melanie Henderson, who would win the Main Street Rag Poetry Award in 2013 for Elegies for New York Avenue. Alan King, who would publish Drift, and Derek Weston Brown, who would publish Wisdom Teeth. There was Patricia Biella, who took me to see the literary giant Wanda Coleman at the Folger Theater when I had no clue who she was, and Fred Joyner, who told me about Kavi Khanum, an organization specifically for Black poets. None of these writers had books or publications, nor had they received awards or fellowships when I met them. We were all trying to figure it out together. Beyond craft, these writers taught me valuable lessons about humanity and how to be a world citizens. On the eve of Thanksgiving in 2003, Truth took me to a park on K Street, not far from a church I frequented when I was homeless for 2 years in D.C. Here, I encountered men and women whose position I once occupied on those park benches. I knew the grime residing under the fingernails, the grumble and the growl in their stomachs, the vacant eyes. I had waited for the same wagon to bring a meal on the day my stomach was talking to my backbone. Now I was handing out blankets. That night, Truth held a mirror to my face to let me know that change is indeed possible. In 2004, these writers took me to Fierce Flower at James Madison University, the first major conference on African American poetry since the 1970s. I met the likes of Black poetry icons Amiri Baraka, Sonia Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni, Lucille Clifton, and Hakeem Madhubuti. I was literally talking to the architects of the Black arts movement. I was new to this thing called poetry, and they answered my fumbling questions generously. Although I felt out of place like an observer, the writers assured me that I belonged. No one cared that I was an ex-convict or that I had been to prison. They were more interested in who I was reading. And after listening to Hakeem Madhubuti talk about the MFA program at Chicago State University, the only one in the country with a focus on the Black experience, I knew I was going to go, no matter if I didn't know how. When I enrolled a year later after graduating from the University of the District of Columbia, the MFA program found some money for me after learning what I had gone through to get there. I did not actively seek a writing life more than I sought out community. I became connected to a way of existing as the returning citizen, as a writer, as a human. I was not some great miscarriage of justice coming out of prison. I ran analogous to and with the night in all it encompassed. Mine was not a cause to make it easier to be accepted, let alone forgiven. If I could not have been my full self in all my complicated experiences, a writing life would still be perhaps an unattainable dream. I ran face first and afraid toward a community and in return, they told me where to go for the workshops, where to submit work, and where to find employment opportunities in all fields: community, service, retreats, reading series, educational opportunities, grants, and fellowships, including the National Endowment of the Arts Literature Fellowship, which I received in 2013. And now Sebastian, Big Pond, Milkman, and Hell Now must be out of prison. Though I do not know their full or real names, or where they are, if I could, I would tell them thank you. The same thank you that I tell Pat Parker when we have our yearly talk by the phone. I tell them what I learned through them and many others after. There isn't one single way to a writing life, only your own. Thank you. I hope I wasn't too long. I apologize for that.
You even try to apologize for that, we're gonna have a fight. Randall, I've read that essay how many times, and hearing you read it, it just gave me chills and I was holding back tears, man. I think what this essay does, and I need to state it out loud hearing it, is I'm like, it's as much for folks inside to hear about what's possible in the outside as it is for literary community when they ask, how can I do prison work? I'm like, just make relationships, make space for people coming home. You lay out the map. You lay out the map in that. And I put in the chat, but I want to say it out loud. That essay is all about giving people their flowers while they're still here. And that is just a way to philosophy and a way to move through life. So thank you for that example.
It was important for me to read that, but to give them that. That's why I chose that. So thanks. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for saying yes and then pulling that out. Boom. You can't even imagine the process of editing this book. I was like, can you write about this? And then people came back with that.
That's what I was thinking too. You did a hell of a job with the editing, man. What?
Well, okay. That's not what I was trying to say.
No, but I'm just saying. Anyway.
No, we're always just saying. Okay, this is actually a wonderful trajectory. And I don't know if it was intended in the flow of the show, because Sue did a phenomenal, shout out to Sue, did a phenomenal script of putting this together and making the signs that really spoke to my DIY self. Incredible, Sue. Okay, this next reader is also a friend. Is also somebody that I met and said, you're gonna be my friend. And this writer showed up to that reading of Glitter Squirrels. That's the first place we met. They posted on Instagram things that touched my heart about it. And then I was like, who are you? And then the same week they came to our next event and they stood up in the audience. And I was like, who is this oracle? I'll tell you who this oracle is. It's Nicole Shawan Jr. Nicole Shawan Jr. creates space. What's so beautiful about hearing Randall's essay with the people who created space for you, Randall, is that Nicole is that person for so many people, okay? And I don't even have enough words to say. We've cried together, we've read cards together, we've moved together. Every time Nicole shows up, the vulnerability is full force, but it never feels too heavy. It feels like you're being welcomed to witness truth, but also feels like you're being asked to hold a little piece of it, but a very appropriate piece, because Nicole's got this shit under control. Oh, excuse me, this stuff under control. I can't wait, especially for the people inside right now, to meet Nicole. You'll see why. And Nicole, I'm gonna let their essay speak for itself, because that's part of what they're gonna read. But it's rife with pedagogy. So if you're interested in teaching, listen up. My friend Nicole Shawan Jr., who we call each other cousins, I had to throw an inside joke in there because it makes me feel cool. All the people in this call make me feel cool. It's really why I do this work. Nicole Shawan Jr. is a Brooklyn-bred Black queer counter storyteller published in Gay Mag and elsewhere. Lots of elsewheres. This is a short bio. Nicole is also the founder of Roots, Wounds, Words, a literary arts revolution, where they build up the next generation of young women and non-binary folks of color. And by the way, Nicole will be just interviewing Jesmyn Ward soon, and it sold out in like seconds, so I couldn't go get a ticket. Get ready. Welcome, Nicole.
I have to say gratitude to my Egun, my spirit guides, my ancestors, gratitude to the Orisha, Mafedefun, Olodumare for bringing me to this space. I am so grateful. I'm humbled to be here amongst giants. Randall, I don't even know what to say. Thank you. Thank you for that gift, for that offering to community. Thank you, everyone, for the wonderful gifts this evening and those to come. Caits, my friend, my cousins, you changed my life and saved it in so many ways. Gratitude to you. Jen, it was a pleasure meeting you on the mountain in Vermont, and I have not let you go ever since. The MPWW team. I'm going to read an excerpt from an essay that I have in the sentences that create us. And I hope that this resonates with some of you, particularly those who are writing instructors and those who are interested in teaching writing to this very particular marginalized, invisibilized community of which I am a part. All right. It's called Remix the Plan, Return to the Purpose, How to Center Participant Storytelling and Writing Workshops. Ashe. The waiting room was cramped. Self-care bulletins, hotline advertisements, and glossy Department of Probation postings were taped on its green walls. In slanted cursive, a child-sized post-it cautioned, please note, New York City Department of Probation POs work 7 days per week. Any departmental representative can visit your home, employment, program, school, or family member's home. Thanks. Wide-legged and cross-armed, a young man slumped into a seat beneath the warning. Across the room, under a baseball cap's brim, another's eyes were closed. His head hung low as he napped. Next to him, a woman no older than 25 cupped her cheek with a palm, sculpted nails pressing into hair slicked into a high bun. Well past her 50s, a gray-headed woman sat behind a personal shopping cart filled with plastic bags of all colors and sizes. Just under a dozen storytellers sat in the waiting room of the New York City Department of Probation's Bed-Stuy office. Instead of meeting with their POs, they were there to participate in the first session of a 10-week writing program Probation hired me to facilitate. By the looks of it, but for the woman with the cart, no one gave a shit about who I was or what I had to say. The Department of Probation's incentive had worked. The storytellers were there because attending my class absolved them from reporting to their respective POs each week. I began my work, y'all, with justice-involved teenagers and adults not even a year after I was released from probation's vice grip. I was a felon armed with graduate degrees in law and education, as well as experience as a fourth grade teacher and law school adjunct professor. I submitted a writing workshop proposal with one goal: to bring literary art's restorative and transformative powers to people who sat in the very seats I was just released from. I hadn't even signed the contract before I began to construct the curriculum. Weeks before the course began, I developed a plan to teach literary craft, to incorporate writing prompts, and to give thoughtful homework assignments for each session. I mapped the 10 weeks to perfection. Week 1 would handle place, week 2 would cover time, week 3 would focus on characterization, and so on. Once the curriculum was set, I developed 10 lesson plans to correspond with the schedule it laid out. In them, I included the goals, a motivation to get things started, a list of essays and other resources needed for the day's lesson, and more. Then I drafted the syllabus, a proverbial mixtape, if you will, of Black and Latinx essays, memoir chapters, and short stories. I looped authors such as Reginald Dwayne Betts, Jaquira Diaz, Mitchell Jackson, Sandra Cisneros, Patrice Gaines, and more throughout the document like a cassette tape. The contract was eventually signed, and I couldn't wait to get started, confident that my 10-week curriculum was dope as fuck. I handed each storyteller a syllabus. Today, we're gonna learn about place, I said while surveilling the room. The young woman with the gorgeous nails typed ferociously on her phone. The man who slept when I first walked in pulled his hat down to cover his eyes. The older woman's eyebrows twisted into a question mark, though once or twice she nodded as if to encourage me. In general, eyes glazed over as I stuck to my script. This is week 1. If you look at the syllabus I handed out, you'll notice Miss, how long this class gonna be? One storyteller interrupted. Moments later, another asked, yo, you a PO? Mouth dry and ego bruised, I stuttered and stammered through the rest of the class, ending at 15 minutes early. The storytellers signed the attendance log and raced out to their lives. I scooped discarded syllabi from the floor, closed the door behind me and walked home, shoulders slumped. Before the session, I was confident in my work and its purpose. When it ended, I questioned whether I should even show my face again after such a pitiful display. For days, y'all, shame and doubt stuck to me like a catchy hook. Humiliated, I considered the lies I could tell probation to relinquish me from my contract. Finally, with the second session fast approaching, I forced myself to return to my curriculum. At my laptop, I opened the file and read it over. As I looked through each week's goals, a thought struck. Everything I'd done, the curriculum, the facilitation style, the dedication to my script failed. It failed to center the storytellers. Instead, my ego was the only thing I had set up to serve. It was time to get out of my bag and set the former professor aside. I remixed the curriculum, lesson plans, and syllabus to reflect storytelling in all its forms. I added oral, musical, and visual storytelling into the blend. Rada Blanc, Jay-Z, Kehinde Wiley, Kendrick Lamar, and more made it into the cut. Including various storytelling forms and inspirations for my storytellers to engage their narratives became the primary focus. Teaching craft was still a goal, but one not nearly as important as hearing their stories. The next session, I arrived early to the post-it, reminding me that POs work 7 days a week, that the room I occupied, the room wherein I was trying to do this restorative, transformative work, was replete with structural oppression and trauma. Meeting storytellers in a probation office where just beyond our room's door, POs sat in their respective offices was far from ideal, of course. As a matter of fact, y'all, it was a first-degree assault on my mission. I pushed the tables aside to lean against the walls, moved all the chairs to the middle of the floor, organized them into a circle. The portable speaker that crowded my purse, I placed it in a corner and connected it to my cell phone. Once the Wi-Fi loaded, soft beats pulsed, and eventually I burned sage throughout the space to purify the air and energy. As storytellers arrived, I invited each one to sit in a circle. The circle ensured we'd be able to truly see and hear one another. It allowed us to create a safe space despite the building, despite the system that caged us. On a scale of 1 to 10, I asked, how are you feeling right now? Set on getting everyone talking, I continued, what's one thing you enjoyed doing since the last time we were here? And what's a goal you have for this week? I want us to go around the room so everyone can answer the questions. I was the first one to take on the call, right? I answered my own questions, modeling how I wanted my storytellers to begin each of our sessions moving forward. Everyone rated their emotional states according to the scale I set, talked about things that brought joy the week prior, and disclosed upcoming goals. Most were excited to talk, although others did so begrudgingly. The responses led to shared stories, y'all, even if brief. Oral storytelling was underway. Soon I realized that checking in caused cell phones to be ignored, eyes to stay open, bodies to sit upright. Checking in enabled me to assess the storyteller's individual emotional states, right? Which informed my decision about the kind of work we perform in the session that day, even if it meant deviating from my scripted lesson plan. Checking in also brought us closer to one another, helped us to develop rapport and manifest trust amongst strangers. It reminded them that I wasn't a probation officer, that I did not work with law enforcement, and that the space we created, we did so together. I grabbed my cell phone and plugged Where I'm From into the search browser. The Wi-Fi's loading wheel popped onto my screen and like a slow jam moved unhurriedly. I braced myself for having to rap the lyrics myself a cappella. But finally, the internet came through. And as the song's intro bumped, I gave each storyteller a handout containing the lyrics. Oh, come on, miss, we gotta read. Rashid's eyes rolled beneath his baseball cap. Michael smacked his forehead with the paper, not this again. Calm down, I urged. This isn't a syllabus, it's just lyrics. Then Jay spat. I'm from where hammers rung, news cameras never come. You and your man's hung in every verse in your rhyme. Where the grams get slung, niggas vanish every summer. Where the blue vans would come, we throw the roke in a can and run. But for the track, the room fell silent. Together, the storytellers and I listened to Jay rhyme about Marcy projects as we read along. The choice in song, y'all, was intentional. Jay-Z is a hometown hero, born and bred in the very neighborhood wherein we sat, the neighborhood where we resided or had a connection to in some way. In where I'm from, Jay-Z invites the listener to journey with him through Marcy projects in particular, and Bed-Stuy in general, the environs and afflictions, dreams, and dilemmas. In that one track, he paints Bed-Stuy as place better than Monet did water lilies in a pond. When the track quieted to an end, the conversation flowed. Unbeknownst to my storytellers, I would endeavor yet again to talk about place as literary craft. Only this time, I didn't approach it as a professorial pedagogical moment incorporating literary arts theory and practice. Nah, fuck no. Instead, the storytellers and I naturally defined the sounds, sights, tastes, smells, feelings attributed to the places we love through the use of something familiar. A song from the Bed-Stuy boy whose stories led him to become a globally recognized man. Thank you.
Who feels like they're in church yet? I want every single public school educator primarily to read that essay. Nicole, I think, you know, you have to imagine me getting these essays and like giggling because I knew how freaking good they were. I was like, are you kidding me? The pedagogy of how to build a class, of how to teach, of how to, I mean, it's all in there. And the part I was going to read, Nicole, was actually at the very end because I loved the flexibility of this and I loved your bringing of spirituality in, and I loved, and I'm going to read it. Sorry, I'm going to close out your essay, okay? There's some other parts of it. So, you know, fast forward. And actually, I'll reveal a little bit of our process because I said to Nicole, now look, you know, obviously you're talking about a probation office, but folks in prison, they can't bring in sage. Like, let's think about, maybe they can, depending on the space and the religious, you know, allowances. But by and large, that's, who knows, right? So how do you like make space when all you have is a classroom and it's not yours and it's in a prison? And this is what Nicole came back with, okay? Get this. It's been 2 years since my first session with probation storytellers. Since then, I've taught the 10-week workshop 8 times. Often I still have to pivot. When told I could no longer burn sage because it created a fire risk, I cleansed the room by walking through it with lavender packets, healing crystals such as black tourmaline, and amethyst, and my imagination. I spent time intentionally envisioning the space as one full of glowing sunlight, laughter, and hearty conversation. The week when Brooklyn rapper Pop Smoke was murdered in LA, I led storytellers through mindfulness exercises, including breath work and tapping. We drew breaths deep into our guts and exhaled loudly while gently tapping our foreheads, noses, shoulders, chests, and stomach to relieve our bodies of the anger, anxiety, and grief held within. When 2 of the storytellers who were dating had a rupture during class, I changed the lesson completely. Instead of discussing literary voice, we talked about the challenges of being vulnerable in our romantic relationships. So glad to introduce you to my friend who is a healer, Nicole Shawan Jr. Thank you, Nicole. And what a reading. Man, you go from like Randall to Nicole, you never want to read it out loud again because what great voices. And I love, Nicole, that you really brought to the fore oral storytelling because in this book, there's also a section on storytelling, no paper or pencil required. I get a lot of questions about people's literacy, how you work around that in prison, the different scales of what people bring to the table. And it's just a perfect segue into our next guest. Our next contributor is someone I'm a fan of, okay? I'm a fan of everybody, but I don't know Nigel Poor personally until now and over email. Nigel Poor is It says Nigel Poor of the, but Nigel Poor is the co-creator of the award-winning podcast Ear Hustle, which she co-founded with Earlonne Woods and Anton Williams in 2017. And now also as a third host, my friend Rasan Thomas, who I got to see in December at San Quentin. And I learned what a San Quentin hug is, which is this. You know, Nigel. It's the first podcast created and produced in prisons to tell stories of daily life inside California's San Quentin prison. In 2020, Ear Hustle was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in audio recording, the first time this category was recognized. An interview between Earlonne and Nigel is included in the On Journalism section of the anthology. Now, I gotta tell you that Ear Hustle came out just about the time I was starting this job after I'd taught for quite a few years in prisons. And I was so hungry for content that really told the stories that I saw inside. I was in a women's prison, but I was seeing reflected just the depth and humanity of the people I knew and loved, even when it wasn't about the exact people I knew and loved. And I thought, this is a culture shifter. This is going to change the entire landscape. And it has, and it continues to. Ear Hustle has a new book out. Nigel, I can't tell you how important your work has been to me personally and to our community. It's a big deal. And I'm going to read just a little instructional piece from your interview. It gives a nice taste of the book. You've heard some real, beautiful pedagogy. And there are some brass tacks in here, which I think is what's so special about this as a collection. So Nigel answered a question, one of these big questions: how does one scout out a good story on the inside? By the way, shout out to Kate Camel, who was my former intern and a journalism major who conducted these interviews, which was fantastic. So Nigel says, giving great tips. We do pre-interviews, and I also love the honesty. Get ready for this. There have been stories where we're just like it can't go anywhere because the person just can't tell a story. Part of our job is to bring it out, make people comfortable, talk with them over and over again. So we set the stage, create the environment where they can tell their story best. We want to make sure they know what we do. We explain what the story is, what our process is like, kind of like a first date. You're seeing if this can go anywhere, if people are going to be comfortable and understand what they're getting into. And then we'll ask them some questions to see how well they can tell the story and what the details of that are. It's all about relationship building. Sometimes people will come in and it's not going to work for us. They have an agenda that's not our agenda. We also don't want to disappoint people, but we have to be friendly, but also in control, which I think is just such critical advice to other artists grappling with a very hungry series of people who want to work with them. So Nigel, thank you for your brass tacks and for your unbelievable storytelling skills. I'm losing words because I'm so nervous and excited.
Oh, thank you. I think I'm sharing the screen, and I believe I have the power to do that. So give me just 1 second. Okay, I'm going to do something slightly different, which is to play audio for you all. So yes, I'm going to be talking about Ear Hustle, the podcast that I co-created with Earlonne Woods, who was incarcerated at San Quentin at the time, serving a 32-year life sentence. I met him in 2012 when I was volunteering through the Prison University Project, and he was incarcerated at San Quentin. And we started working together on a radio project for a few years. And eventually we decided we wanted to branch out and start a podcast about everyday life in prison. And when we talked about doing it, people had all kinds of assumptions about what this podcast was going to be. And people assumed because it was in prison, it was going to be really violent and depressing, or it was going to be all about crime or stories about the wrongfully convicted. But that was not anything close to what we wanted to do. We wanted to tell stories from the perspective of being artists and looking at the everyday. And that's what we did. So as many of you know, working in prison is incredibly difficult. To accomplish anything, you have to be so tenacious, and you really have to know what you want to do, while at the same time being incredibly open to whatever comes your way. So what I want to do is to play just a couple clips for you clips that will illustrate the kinds of stories we tell and the ways that we deal with challenges and setbacks, which inevitably are going to be part of any work you do inside an institution, particularly inside a prison. So there goes a train. Sorry, our studio is near a train. So one of the things that I think is so important in storytelling is mixing emotions and finding the humor and the beauty and the tenderness and the brutality of any situation and mixing it together, because all of our lives, no matter where they are lived, are not one note. And we wanted to make sure that our stories inside the prison were like that we used humor, that we used joy, but we also didn't shy away from the things that were really difficult and painful. So the clip I want to play for you is from one of our early stories called Looking Out. It's 1 minute and 53 seconds. And I chose it because it illustrates the 3 things that are really important to us in every Ear Hustle story. First is that Erlon and I are the co-hosts, the escorts. And so we bring people through the story. Originally, Erlon was the voice of the person inside. I was the voice of the person outside. And we really wanted to work together as colleagues and friends. And so you'll hear us talking through this clip. The second thing is what I said earlier, the idea of all these emotions being mixed into one story. And the third part of the Ear Hustle story is the sound of it, the sound design, which is done by Antoine Williams, who was also one of the co-creators of the podcast. So I'm going to play this for you, and then I'll talk a little bit about it after we listen to it. So this is Roach. And again, the story is called Looking Out. And it's really a story about finding love and giving love in prison, in a place where it's not always easy to do that. So how would you describe him?
To me, I think Roach looked like the original Jesus Christ. You know, I mean, he got the dreadlocks. He looked like he's from the earth. And if he could, he'd probably just be wearing a leaf. And he got this one little thing that he do. He'll just start sniffing on his dreadlocks.
I know, I've seen him do that. He grabs his hair and he pulls it in front of his nose and just sniffs.
Why are you whispering?
Because I feel like I'm talking about him behind his back. He knows he does it, right?
Yeah.
It's not like he's going to hear this and go, oh my God, I sniffed my hair.
Hey, he'll catch himself and you just be looking at him, he's like,
FYI, I do smell my dreads. I put different oil on each one of them. They smell good. They smell like I just came out the dirt, hanging out with roots and stuff.
But you know what though? When people from the outside look at Roach, they be like, oh, dude weird, man, I ain't talking to dude. But Roach is a cool dude.
My name is Randall Draper, but I go by Roach. My relationship with people is pretty strained. I don't trust them. From early on, they have been a source of pain for me.
So Roach is about 40 years old, and he's a pretty shy guy.
Until you know him.
When I was a child, before I was removed from the care of my mom's custody, she tried to drown me a couple times in the tub. And then she stopped and she left the bathroom and she was crying. I knew she was unhappy or sad at something I did. I wanted to actually comfort her, but I didn't know how to do it. I don't remember her face, and I haven't seen her since.
I've heard that clip so many times, and I still find something to be moved by in it. And again, it's about the relationship between myself and Erlon, the sound of the story that moves you through it. It starts out lighthearted, and we're laughing, and then you get this signal of this water starting to fall, and that sound brings you into a completely different space that feels hollow and empty and dark and foreboding. And then the story really shifts, and you hear about how Roach grew up. And he says something at the end that is so heartbreaking about, it's not that it's not just that he hasn't seen his mother, he doesn't remember her face. And the idea of someone not remembering a face is a complete erasure of an experience. Yeah. So also in prison, a bunch of people have talked about this, and Ellen pointed it out really beautifully, that there are challenges and you always have to find a workaround in prison. If you give up easily, don't even bother starting, because everything you want to do is going to come with a challenge. And for every creative person, whether you're working inside a prison or outside, that is just part of life. And so sometimes the best thing is to take those challenges and turn it into something that works really beautifully with your story. So when we were recording everything inside San Quentin, we were working in the space you can see here that was concrete, was really loud. People were coming in and out all the time. And when you're doing a podcast and you're recording, silence is the golden rule, but for us, that was not the rule at all. So instead of getting frustrated, we decided to make use of all the crazy sounds. So this was just a little 38-second piece we put together that we would play in the podcast as a way to say that the sound of San Quentin is one of the characters in the podcast.
Access for a favor, they kick us out.
All right, we need quiet now. We're gonna record.
Top of the line team, the Raiders, baby. Raider Nation, baby. Yeah.
It's so freaking hard to make it quiet in here.
It's prison.
We gotta turn that fan off
Hey, do
now.
you think it's quiet enough?
It's finna get hot. Nope, never is.
It's never freaking quiet enough in here, man.
Never quiet. It's prison for you. All right, everybody, we're gonna need some quiet.
Hey, Jazzy.
All right, we're recording.
Hey, can we get about 10 minutes so we can get this line out?
No problem, man.
Hey, good looking out.
Hear that?
Yep.
Thank you.
Hear what?
It's finally quiet in here.
Okay, let's do it.
Always on the hunt for the quiet. We try to do stories in all parts of the prison, and it can be really challenging. San Quentin has death row. There's about 700 men on death row, and it's really difficult to get there. And so we wanted to find a workaround. The only way we could end up doing a story there was by interviewing men on the phone. And I wanted to play this very short clip from an interview we did with Steve Champion, who'd at that point been on death row for over 30 years. And the idea of the story was to talk about how that kind of isolation affects your five senses. And at the end of our interview, he said this really wonderful thing, which I want to share.
As long as you are alive, there is hope. When you are dead, that struggle is over. You can't look in terms of the future because the future is not yet here. So what do you have left? You have right now. And so that is what you have to live at, right here, right now. That's eternity.
So I hope that all of us can live here right now and find our everlasting eternity. I think it's such a beautiful thing, beautiful words to be inspired by. I'm going to end very quickly by just sharing this. Erlon's sentence was commuted by Governor Brown in 2018, so he's been out of prison since then. And now we do stories about life post-incarceration. And during COVID, we spent our time writing a book together about our experiences with Ear Hustle. So we keep working and trying to find new ways to get stories out. So thank you. Thank you for listening. Now I'll stop sharing the screen.
All I see in the chat is inspired, 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 inspired. I almost am left speechless. Nigel, with the way that you approach just even the presentation you just gave us, there was so much pedagogy that's in the interview that you just brought to life with photos, the rapport between you and Erlon and that levity that moves into the difficult space is clearly, as a team, you're masterful storytellers. And I think one of the real gifts, of course, I have to keep bringing back to the book because this is my job, but one of the gifts of having you in this book is that I think you really show what happens when you cross mediums. You're a visual artist, right?
Yeah.
For much of your career and quite successfully. And here you pivoted into a totally new art form, and it's ingenious. So when you think about the sound design and how part of the story that is, what I start to think about as a writer is, how do I take that conceptually and use it in my work? And there's so many ways to think about that, right? It's the intentionality of the environment you create, the using what you have, the workaround, as you call it, and other folks in prison call it. the rapport. And I think you really illustrate what we're trying to do with this book, which is it's largely written by justice involved contributors, but not entirely. And the reason is because we are a community. And so we want people to be in relationship through the walls. And that was part of the intention, not to further isolate. So thank you for all the many ways you illustrate so much of this work in the world and on such a large scale and so profoundly. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
And one day I'll meet Erlan. One day. One day.
Yes, yes.
Okay, woo, this is really shaping up to being, one of the most meaningful nights of my life. And I think I've said that a few times in relationship to MPWW. So, that's just how they roll over here. The next contributor, I cannot even tell you how many people in prison have told me how much his work means to them. It is a recurring phrase in my life. Do you know Luis J. Rodriguez, though? Because his book changed my life. I finally got to do a panel with Luis at AWP talking about writing in prison, and I saw him speak at the Art for Justice conference in New Orleans, and I said, I want to work with that man one day. I did not imagine that I would get one of the longest essays, the On Poetry chapter from him. In fact, I couldn't even decide which section to read because Luis's approach, well, I'm just going to read you the excerpt. And I'll tell you a little bit more about who he is. It opens with poetry as soul talk, my story. By the way, I asked all the writers, or many of the writers, not all of them, to write in a bit of their personal narrative as part of this opening of camaraderie, of building community, even on the page. And I think Luis nailed it. You tell me what you think. I came to the power of poetry even before I knew what poetry was about. At age 16, I sat on Murderers Row in the Hall of Justice jail during the 1970 Chicano moratorium against the Vietnam War in East Los Angeles, the largest anti-war protest in a community of color at the time. After sheriff's deputies attacked a largely peaceful group at Laguna Park, the so-called East LA riot ensued, leading to the murder of 3 people, including the Chicano journalist Ruben Salazar. I was one of 5 cholos looking at possible charges in those deaths. I had a cell next to Charles Manson. The first night, 2 murder suspects and myself put a razor blade to my neck, but I stood up to them. They laughed and removed the blade. Then we played cards all night long. But I had no interest in cards. Someone had paper and a pencil. I began to write. Thoughts, vignettes, anecdotes. I had no training in writing, but I loved to read, having spent hours in downtown Central Library when I was homeless. This scribbling opened a door to my own gifts. Despite having been punished as a child for speaking Spanish in schools and not taught English very well, language became one of my most important attributes, which everyone has, although not necessarily with words. The chapter, I call it a chapter because it's a good 20 pages, goes on to teach poetry in a way I have never seen it taught. It is full of spirituality. It has some of the most gorgeous writing prompts I've ever witnessed. The Aztec mythology that Luis uses to frame a poem, its face and its heart, it takes the art form into a whole other level. I mean, I learned so much from reading this. If you're around on March 1st, Luis and I will be chatting, just the 2 of us, at the cultural center he founded, Chiachucha. We'll be both in person and virtual. I can't wait to sit down with you, Luis, and get to know you even better. Luis's bio is also like 1 million times long. He's the author of, get this, 16 books, including the best-selling memoir, Always Running, La Vida Loca, Gang Days in LA. He is the founder of Chiachucha Press and a former Los Angeles poet laureate. He is running for office right now. The man does it all. Welcome, Luis.
Thank you, everybody. What an honor to be here and with Caits and this beautiful book. I want to greet you all with the words Guiraba. That's in my mother's tongue, the Rarámuri tribe of Chihuahua, Mexico. It means we are one. And it's a reminder that despite everything, including walls, we are still one. We are still human. We need to care for each other. We need to understand each other. We need to help each other. And that's why I do the work that I do. In that um, essay, I started the poem that I wrote when I was in Murder's Row that later became this poem that I'm going to read. And I fixed it up years later. It's not too good then, but it's called The Calling, because if anybody was saved by words, I'm one of those. Words saved my life. The struggle for words, the finding words, getting poetry. And as many people know, besides the fact that I was in and out of jail, juvenile hall, I was homeless for 3 years as a teen. I was on heroin for 7 years. I was in pretty rough shape, but the lifeline of poetry was there. And I learned that the lifeline was inside me. That's what I teach these men and women and these youth that I work with. They already have the lifeline inside them. Poetry, art, music, dance, it's already inside of them. So I'm going to read you this poem. It's called The Calling. It goes like this. The calling came to me while I languished in my room, while I withered away my youth in jail cells and damp battlefields. It brought me to life out of captivity in a street scarred and tattooed place I called body. Until then, I waited silently, a deafening clamor in my head, voiceless to all around, hidden from America's eyes, a brown boy without a name. I would sing into a solitary tape recorder, music never to be heard. I would write my thoughts in scrambled English. I would take photos in my mind, plan out new parks, bushy green, concrete free, new places to play and think. Waiting, then it came, the calling. It brought me out of my room. It forced me to escape night captors in street prisons. It called me to war, to be writer, to be scientist and march with the soldiers of change. It called me from the shadows, out of the wreckage of my barrio, from among those who did not exist. I waited all of 16 years for this time. Somehow unexpected, I was called. So I have to thank the civil rights struggles of the 60s and 70s. I have to thank the social justice struggles of the day. My saviors were the radicals of Watts in East LA. I grew up in Watts and then I moved to the East LA area. And it was the revolutionaries of the time. And they were in Brown Berets, they were Black Panthers, they were in AIM, there was in all these organizations, they were just organizing, and they got me. And it was the best thing going because again, I was in pretty bad shape. I was convicted, I'm formerly incarcerated, but my conviction went down really low compared to what I was facing. I was facing many years in prison for fighting with police officers. Supposedly I had assaulted police officers. But these people stepped up on my behalf. They went to court, they wrote letters. The judge said he'd never seen anything like that. And they were saying, look, he was a bad kid, he's bad news, we know that, but he's got something. And he gave me time served in the county jail. And I felt so obligated to people and the movement. And I did something that's very hard to do. I started my first heroin withdrawals in the county jail, which is difficult because you can get heroin, everything there. And I also started this idea that if I'm going to go to prison, I'm going to go on my terms. As a heroin addict, you don't want to be in that situation because as anybody knows, addicts are owned. That's just the way it is. And I wanted to go on my terms, but they saved me from the prison term. I got out and I never looked back. I've never been arrested for a criminal act since then. But what I ended up doing is about age 25, I thought about all my homies that were still in prison. I was still in touch with them. Some of them serving 20, 30, 40 years. I thought about all my homies who had died. I lost 25 by the time I was 18. And I thought, I can't just be in the world without me giving back at another level. So in 1980, I ended up going to Chino Prison to help facilitate creative writing classes there. And this is over 40 years ago, and I've been going to prisons ever since. It's been the most amazing work that I can imagine doing. Because of my work, I've been able to go up and down the state of California. San Quentin is one of my favorite places. But also, I've been going to 18 states. When I moved to Chicago, 1985, I was there from 1985 to the year 2000. I ended up going to prisons all over Illinois and juvenile facilities up and down the state of Illinois. And did a lot of work in the Audi home, or what's called the Juvenile Detention Center, working with the kids there. it's been the work. And not only that, besides the 18 states, because of my reputation, they brought me to Mexico, Central America, South America, England. I was in 3 days. I did creative writing classes in Southern England in a prison, and also with juvenile offenders. It's become an international thing. I love this work. The only thing that has stopped me now is the pandemic. I stopped going because of the pandemic. I don't trust the California Department of Corrections when they say we can try to come in. There are a lot of anti-vaxxers among them, the guards, among the staff, believe it or not, which I'm sure you believe. I just don't trust they're taking care of the men and women in these facilities, and I know they don't. I was gonna enter a women's prison, which I had done before, and then they backed off, and then they didn't want me in there, all kinds of things. I decided that I'm not gonna be able to get in under these conditions, but I don't wanna forget. So one of the things I did is I've created several anthologies, and I've published several individual books of formerly incarcerated people. I have 2 books publishing houses. Theatricha Press is one. This is a Theatricha Press book. It's called Make a Poem Cry, Creative Writing from California's Lancaster Prison. I also have a Barking Rooster books that publishes books of redemption. But I'm going to read you a poem from one of these books in my anthology. And it's from somebody that people know, Spoon Jackson. I know people know him. He's already done close to 45 years. And,
he's in the book. Sorry, Louise.
Yes.
I had to just say, you
have to say, because Spoon is, everybody loves him, everybody knows him. And he was in my class. He walked in there and he came into my class, and I had already been writing Spoon. I just then never saw him. He shows up in my class. He didn't say a word for about 2-3 weeks. And then somebody says, you know, Spoon Jackson. I started talking about Spoon Jackson. He's right here. Are you kidding me? Stanley Jackson was Spoon Jackson. So anyway, we've been friends. I want to read a poem that he wrote called Palm, that's in this book, Calm. It's in this book, Make a Poem Cry. And you get this book by any bookstore, but Theatricha Press also has a bookstore, theatricha.org/bookstore if you want. Poem goes like this. Most people shy away, and not towards a storm. Most people back away and not try to ride a tidal wave. But there is a calm at the heart of a storm, sometimes peaceful and warm. I long to step into the tranquility, the silence of a hurricane where cherry blossoms form. No bickering, no hatred, no bullying, no lies, just calm in the midst of chaos. There must be untold light there, a slumbering goddess where kindness flourish and one can leave this world behind. And that's actually the kind of person he was. If you knew anything about Spoon, he was a calm in the midst of a lot of chaos. I want to speak briefly about my oldest son. Many people know I wrote my book, Always Running, and It Calls You Back, my 2 memoirs. I have a lot to do with him. His name is Ramiro. He's 47 years old this year. He's a father and a grandfather. And as people know, he got involved. I moved to Chicago in '85, like I said. And then my son, who got in a lot of trouble, ended up coming over there. And I didn't raise my son, which is another story in itself. But part of the thing was I had a hard time with him. You know, when you have a 13-year-old boy and he'd never seen you as a dad, it's hard to be a dad. You have to earn that name. And it took hard. In 2 years, he was in a gang in Chicago. And I know I was going to lose my son. I felt it. I dreamt about it. I did everything I could to stop him being in the gang. But once he was in the gang, it wasn't about the gang. It was about me being his father and working with him and being with him and giving whatever he needed. And it looked like we were doing pretty good up and down, back and forth. But you know how hard that life is. So he went to prison when he was 17 for about 1.5 years. And we thought it was done. You know, it's like me, you know, we're done. You know, hey, let's get out in the world. But unfortunately, at age 21, he got involved with some shootings. And he shot at somebody that actually almost died. He didn't die, but he did shoot at 2 police officers. And as you know, that's one of the worst things you could possibly do. So he was facing 40 years to life, my son at 21 years old. We had a hell of a struggle. I decided to do what people did with me when I was young and get a lot of community support. And we were able to get it reduced to 28 years. And I know that sounds, it's awful, but 40 years to life is a completely different story. My son, unfortunately, because you have to do 85 to 100% of that time, it was declared unconstitutional when he got the sentence, and briefly, he was able to get half the time a good time. So he was able to do close to 14 years of that sentence. And he was able to get his life together, I have to say, in the prison. It's very difficult. He quit gang life, which is one of the most hardest things to do. Chicago gangs ain't no joke, just like LA gangs, just like gangs anywhere. He was able to sober up in prison, can you imagine? Everything we were teaching him, I got him his indigenous Aztec, Mexica teachings to him as best I could. He learned to get into his spirituality that way. And he's been out of prison now since 2010, so it's 12, going on 12 years. He's doing really good. And I need to say that because I'm really proud of my son. It's hard. The re-entry was difficult. He went through all the problems you can imagine, but he's still there hanging in there. And I just want to read an excerpt of a poem I wrote about him called The Wanton Life. And I'll just read part of it, and it goes like this, and it's to my son, Ramiro. The long fingers of a wanton life, from the ends of a twisted highway, pull at us with the perfume of the streets and its myriad romances, all intoxicating, gripping at our skins as blasts of late night shootouts, the taste of a woman's wet neck in a dark alley, and the explosion of liquor bottles against a cinder block wall free us from the normal world, while chaining us to the warped cement walks of our diminished existence. I ran with you inside of me, entering layers of darkness into the swallowing of night with exhilarating thoughts in the velocity of the city's demands, constantly moving, but inside standing still, searching for words to cut through the dribble, the screams around my ears, the pain of neglect and addictions, running with your voice in my throat, you calling out my name, searching for Father while I search for mine on your earth of many souls, craving the moon, the lunacy and warmth of these rocks covered in mud. I'm gonna end it there. There's a lot more to this poem, there's a lot more to that story. But I think I want to just share that and just tell you that I miss these men and women in the institutions. They need all our help. Many of them are getting out now, so we're doing everything you can to support them. I also started being my son, believe it or not, started a production company, and the first film we're working on is a documentary on a guy that did close to 30 years and has not come out as a poet. Was a shot caller for a major gang here in LA, and is now one of the most decent, amazing human beings. And we're gonna, he probably always was, but you know what I'm saying? He's out there now, he's been out 7 years, and we've been working on his documentary, and we're gonna do other stories. I just finished a treatment on a story that when I was growing up, 4 of my friends were killed by police, unarmed. You know how this goes. And one of them, unfortunately, was the case 1977 of a police officer who may have been the first police officer in the state of California convicted for murder. He kidnapped this friend of mine, shot him, claimed that he was kidnapped, and turned out that he, in fact, was a murderer. They convicted him. He was given a life sentence, but 13 years into a sentence, celebrities and the police fraternal societies and even the then governor, Pete Wilson, got him a retrial and he was released. And he ended up, you know, free. He died in 72 years old of cancer. But many of us have carried that story for 45 years, that injustice. And now we're doing a treatment. And I'm working with one of the guys that was his homie, who was my enemy because they were actually enemy gangs. But when I was dealing with him, I was no longer at war with nobody. I'm not at war with nobody. Everybody is my barrio. You know, everybody is my hood, you know. And so we carried that story, but now we're working with one of the police officers who knew that police officer who was actually ostracized for trying to expose some bad stuff in the police department at the time. At the time, they had a trailer where they had the DEA, Sheriff's Department, all these police departments working to deal with my gang's drug deals and everything. But he saw a lot of injustice. He saw people being set up. He saw guns being put in places where there was no guns. He saw beatings and all kinds of things. And he stepped up now. He's a retired, worked in police for 30 years and stepped up with us. And he's helping us put together this treatment. And I hope it comes out. It's a story that needs to be told. I'm just trying to find every avenue. I am running for governor of the state of California. I'm using every space that we can to tell these stories, to be able to express what we know, to bring justice everywhere we can, and make sure that we can make that shift that we need for the transformation that's necessary. And thank you all for listening. I'm in the struggle with you all. Keep me in your thoughts, and I'll think of all of you, because I hope that we will come across this great work. Mr. Horton, thank you for being there. I love your work, sir. And you mentioned Patricia Smith, and you mentioned Wanda Coleman. They're all good friends of mine. And you mentioned Haki Matabuti. All these people
thanks,
helped me a lot, man. So thank you for being here.
I appreciate you. For
yeah,
real.
man. All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
As you can see, Louise had to write 16 books because the man's got stories. Louise, you managed to really live into what I hoped for this book, which I named instructional, aspirational, inspirational, and historical. You nailed it, especially bringing in these early movements, which so much inspired me as well in my thinking around self-determination and how to build this book. So thank you for bringing all of it into the room, your immense vulnerability. And if you want more storytelling, which I know you do by the chat, because it is deeply compelling to hear Louise talk, come hang with us on March 1st, because it will be all us talking, probably mostly Louise, because he has the stories. Okay, we have 2 folks left. I know we're running over. For those who stayed on, thank you. We're gonna run right into them with joy. How beautiful, Sue, to curate the next person after Louise, because it's Louise. I was trying to play with that reveal, Louise, whose poem is featured in Louise's chapter on poetry. I met Louise first through a poem that won 2nd place in the Pen America Prison Writing Contest the first year I came to Penn. I read that poem in so many rooms. I would bring Louise's work into so many rooms when I was asked to read, places just like Louise brought Spoon Jackson, our friend who's also in this book. I would bring Louise's work into rooms, even when it was my own reading, and say, I got to bring a voice from somebody I work with. I asked Louise to write about her journey in creating this award-winning chapbook that I mentioned earlier on the night. And it is such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful book. It's a beautiful book, but it's a beautiful essay. And Louise, I'm going to read a little bit of it if you'll allow me. She's talking about how she began building the manuscript. So it kind of is in the middle of that. The dedication in the book for my mom and son arrived early in my process. For certain, I knew I wanted to start and end my chapbook with the feeling of home. Ultimately, I chose an emotional journey as the timeline for the book structure. It was not linear. In this poem, I was 23, I was 27 here, this happened when I was 30, this connects to when I was 6. I considered the sound and music of each poem as they bled into the next. I weighed if it was more effective to link them thematically or juxtapose 2 different time periods and concepts. When I needed a title, something that would simultaneously describe me as I am today, portray who I was yesterday, and show who I am striving to be tomorrow, it was suggested to me that I use one of the poems as the title of my collection. I listened to my internal voice until I knew it in my heart. This is where would be my title. What I'm not reading at the end of this essay, or what you might not know, is that after meeting Louise through her work and reading her poem all around New York City and sometimes the country, I got to meet Louise in person when MPWW and Jen brought me out to Shakopee, and I just fell in love with not just her work, but also her spirit, her gentleness. So you can imagine when she came home and had her chapbook released and asked me to be one of the readers, I was highly emotional. And I remember Louise saying, Caits just called me her friend. And I'm like, listen, it's beyond. You teach me through your work. You're also a mentor to me. It is so special to get to introduce you tonight. Louise K. Waakaa'igan, formerly known as Carol A. House, is oh girl, don't make me say this. Please jump in and say what kind of poet you are.
I'm like choking on my tears here. How dare you? Anishinaabe.
Thank you, Anishinaabe poet whose first collection. This is where Published on Aquarius Press 2020. Thanks to Randall Horton. Thanks to MPWW. Thanks to our homie Dwayne Betts, who's not here tonight, but here in spirit. Shares a title with her Penn Prison Writing Award poem, the one I read in many rooms. Louise, I'm sorry to make you snotty, but it's just going to make it more powerful for us. So thank you for going there.
Oh my goodness. I need to have you tag along with me anytime I need to speak publicly, because you intro like no other in this world. Well, you and Jen both, because Jen does a pretty epic intro too. But hello, there's so many beautiful faces that I have to scroll to see you all. What a night. What a night. And let me just, where did I put it? Such an amazing idea, project, finished product. Caits, you are out of this world. You create, you love, you listen, and most of all, you show up. And yes, she was at my book launch, which was a crazy night. And I think if you were there, you know that my mother stole the show, which righteously so. So hopefully she will at any other reading that I have. But yeah, I'm just so honored to be here. I have to pinch myself sometimes because look at the crowd that I am in. Oh my gosh, and to each of you who read before, you have blown my mind. You have made my heart cry. All I can say, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but we need to get our asses together in person. Okay, like Zoom calls are cool, but can we just, I need some of that. So amazing. I'm just so thankful to be here. So thankful for so many to allow me to share my story, to share my truth, even if I didn't at a time really know how to say it. And MPWW, Jen, and all of the mentors and the facilitators and the people that are with MPWW, you are extraordinary humans, and I owe you so much. And I will be forever indebted to you. And on that note, I think my sister Carla is in the audience here tonight. So she is like one of my biggest fans. She shows up to all my readings, even when it's like a half hour before, and I'm like, here's the link. So in honor of her and just for this well-received project, Randall, it's you, man. This is because of you, and so we still need to meet up too. I am gonna read the title poem from this collection, and I think it's so fitting for. It's been over 2 years since I've been home, which is insane to say, you know. It's been beautiful. It's been crazy. It's been frustrating. It's been sad. It's been lonesome. It's been wonderful. But you all know that, right? We're living in the same world. And I'm just grateful. I'm thankful and I'm grateful. So I'm gonna read This Is Where, and if you've heard it, 70 million times, I'm sorry. You're gonna hear it 71 million times, so sit back. This is where. I'm from Beneshi's bloodline. That's Bill Baker if you don't speak Ojibwe-Moan. Ni Migizi Totem. I'm from 6 Mile, 49 and up the driveway, sitting on green boxes, watching cars. Sometimes their doors didn't match. I'm from Packer games on Sundays, Greyhound trips for Christmas, and Easter baskets with Carla. I'm from women with the same last name and a father none of us knew. I'm from the woods, northern, where pines and birch bark blanket both bends of tribal roads, paved and gravel. I'm from a single parent household, Michael Jackson cassette tapes, Purple Rain posters, and latchkey kids. Title V programs, commodes on pantry shelves, cucumbers from Grandpa Jake's garden, and a mean old dog named Turkey. I'm from crying won't change anything, and you should have known better. I'm from punitive silence and where it's normal. Hugs are warm and forced Catholicism still weighs heavy on me mama's shoulders. Yay! You know, anytime I'm thank you. Anytime I'm in this audience, this group that we've had, and a few of us have been together a few times, which has been amazing. But anytime I'm in this collective, I just cry. You guys bring me to this point where I just cry. My heart just leaps and strengthened all in the same breath. So thank you so much for that. I recently read with one of my I looked up to this poet, and I still do. Heidi Erdrich. I don't know if you guys know her or read her stuff, but she is crazy. And anytime that her and I get to do an event together, I scream really loud and embarrassingly, and I turn into this like super fan geek mode, and then we read together, and I am just in awe of all life. And so I read something new with her, and so I want to share it because there's a couple of sweet faces that I just want you guys to hear it too. So this is called Remembering. Surrounded by crisp and sharp air of baboon, Nimama's house keeps me warm. She keeps me standing, walking, still after all those funerals have passed. Holding my mother's hands, tears are building inside my sternum. I'm still choking over his death. I'm remembering to exhale, remembering that it's okay to sit with these mourning tears, surfacing screams from all my incarcerated pain. Will someone ask me how I'm doing? Sometimes the darkness brings me back to those cell blocks, invading my well-being. Miniwa. I trace my fingertips on concrete blocks, numbering the days I've been home. I'm still numbering my days. Prison trauma has scarred my pale frame, changed the way that I carry myself, changing the way I listen to my family. I'm still remembering my days. Gone. Thank you. I could use a drink after that. I have it right over there, and I had a clear glass of like this sparkling liquid, you know. And Emily Baxter one night, she was like, I just want to tell you that we're going to be playing this video in the prisons, and I want to know if it's okay that, you know, the agents are gonna, you know, they're gonna see you drinking. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not that cool. It's sparkling cider. That's where I go. I get so excited when the store has the little individual bottles, and I just found out that they only sell them during the holidays, which is just cruel. So when the holidays come, I'll probably have cases just waiting so I can have them throughout the year. But yeah, I'm not really that cool. But I'm going to close with one poem that actually I wrote quite some time ago, and had the chance to revisit it and kind of remember what I was searching for, what I was writing about, especially in our collective on Sunday nights, what I would just kind of pen out every time I journaled, was this idea of, why are you not home? And kind of punishing myself for the truth that was, and what a waste of time that was, really, just to punish myself, because prisons have an archaic way of just doing that. So, whole nother conversation. But this one is called Those Intricacies. Since being home, I've returned to this desire of seeing that God's eye in the stairwell in 6 Mile. I've forced myself to enter that dark basement again, where surrender was torture. I was 5. I lose myself there, still in my childhood home. I needed my father, and he wasn't there, ever. So I carry still cellular memories, storing fatherless echoes that my heart shattered for. The ones that I became an introvert for. The ones that I rebelled against my own body for. This mosaic I carry of scars and individual burns and historical horrors are buried deep in this mixed blood lineage. I reside here, though. I reside in my anemic body with the stones and birch bark roots of northern Wisconsin. I drifted in frigid waters of Gitchigami, washing clean years of penitentiary sorrows, barring my isolated and pale skin, realigning myself with the elemental properties of Aki. Miigwech, it's such an honor just to be with you, to hear you, to look at your beautiful faces. I know now that I need a new camera because mine just really is not working too good. But thank you, each and every one of you. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for living your truth, for reshaping this world that we live in, for realigning ourselves with love and voice. And I am so grateful to each of you. I love you, and I cannot wait until we are together in person again. You have all of my prayers. You have all of my heart. Miigwech, all of you.
Louise, sometimes I get a feeling of a little bit of nausea when I feel like a lot of power around me. And it's a strange spirit thing. And when you said I just recently wrote this poem and read it, it washed over me. I think I've secretly held a fear that you might stop writing. And the idea of that is so painful as a reader and lover of your work that I feel so relieved that you continue to write and that poems like that are coming out. Thank you for sharing yourself so generously in so many ways. This has been a saturated, emotional evening. And in fact, people have shown up so generously and with so much instruction and inspiration and vulnerability and love across the board that we don't have time for a Q&A, and do we even need one? So much ground has been covered. So it is my honor to end with my friend Jeffrey Young. Jeff, I see Michelle, his mom, all up in the chat. I said, Michelle, your turn is coming. I'm talking about you in a second. I have so rarely seen a parent be such a cheerleader. Michelle, I'm thrilled you're here. I'm going to tell a little story about when I met Jeff that I hope is okay to tell and I hope makes Jen smile. I got to read a poem about New York City of mine when I visited the prison, Stillwater, right? Am I right? Yeah, great. When I visited Stillwater, and Jeff was sitting next to me. And as I'm told, Jeff is a very professional, very serious, very in tune, but quiet and sort of stoic character. And as I was reading this poem, which has a lot of humor in it, about the New York City subway and this interaction I saw in it, he was grinning ear to ear. I couldn't see him, he was next to me. So Jen told me later. And from that moment, I knew Jeff and I had some work to do together. And so in multiple ways, Jeff has been a part of Penn's work. And in this book, he contributes a small but incredibly poignant interview series, actually right next to Nigel's in the book, about being an editor at the prison newspaper, the oldest prison newspaper in America. And again, his offerings are very nuts and bolts in a way that I think really brings to life what it means in this case of what I'm going to read, how you think about an audience, how do you create a publication towards an audience. So this is what Jeff's advice was, or talking about what they do at the Prison Mirror. While we have subscribers from all over the country, the primary audience for the newspaper is the incarcerated population in Minnesota. Our secondary audience is a combination of Minnesota's Department of Corrections, DOC staff, state legislators, and the general public. We try to include a variety of information on every issue for all the aforementioned audiences. Prisoner experiences and prison policy issues are normally directed at legislatures, DOC, and the public, while prison sports events and court cases on prison conditions are written with the incarcerated population in mind. Over the course of my 3.5 years as an associate editor, I've received positive feedback from people in all our targeted audiences, including the governor's office. I think that is a short but sweet roadmap to how you create change. So Jeff, I have to say, wrote me probably the only feedback I need to this book ever. He wrote me a long JPay letter that was gorgeously written. And he didn't quite expect the book to be as good as it was, I could tell. He said, I was going to give my copy to the prison newspaper, but not going to happen. You need to send them one. I wish I could read it to you all because it's so exquisitely rendered, but I just wanted to shout out that Jeff, that letter, which I have told you, but want to say it publicly, affirmed everything for me. Thank you. Jeffrey L. Young, who's done many things, is a Penn Prison Award winner and associate editor of the Prison Mirror, a publication run out of the Minnesota Correctional Facility, Stillwater. That's not even the tip of the iceberg. And it's what you already know because I read it, but let's let his work speak for itself. We're gonna close on one of Jeff's poems, but I think Heidi's gonna come back and give us a very kind message from Jeff.
Yeah, this is Jeff's message to y'all and to Caits. Thank you for your work on this book, Caits. The sentences that create us has the potential to help a person open a door inside themselves via writing to discover worthiness, intelligence, talent, personal power, and social influence. The book will also encourage people to pursue community outside of prison walls. The advice and encouragement to write comes from others who have experienced incarceration, which validates their words. Thank you again for this important book.
Footprints lost, toiling at sunset. Sun descends beneath Earth's lip, inhales peach, plum, raspberry haze. Moon's gravity devours time. Our fingertips dive, sift wet Nantucket, clutch crescent clams. Seagulls float below cotton candy plumes, dissolve into sky fire. Their songs recede. Ocean's edge tumbles towards us, froths, hungers for our trailing souls. Dark depressions in the sodden beach, mute echoes convey a human ache. We were here. Thinking we made truth in sands of time, the ocean unfurls, and we are erased.
We were here, indeed. Jeff, thank you for that absolutely perfect closing. To everybody who read tonight, to MPWW, to Sue for all of the organization, for Jendi, Magic, for Mike, for Heidi, for all our contributors. I have to say on a personal note, on a personal level, as Caits, unconnected from anything else, this was among the most special night to get to bring all these contributors together, to get to love on them, to get to showcase their work, to know that this is being broadcast and will be sent to folks in prison. We're not in the room with you, but we're in the room with you. Thank you all so much for your very generous presence and for being with us tonight.
Thank you, everybody. Woohoo!
Thanks everyone for sticking around.
Thank you so much. We miss everyone inside. Hello. Thank you for joining us. Good night.
Thank you. Miss you.
Everyone.